Have you ever wondered what God truly looks for in a soul before opening the doors of heaven? Have you felt uncertain whether holiness is something far beyond you, reserved for the strong, the flawless, or the extraordinary? And have you quietly asked yourself if someone small, wounded, and imperfect could ever be welcomed fully into God's eternal embrace? Saint Thérèse of Lisieux answered these questions with a simplicity so radical that it still unsettles proud hearts and comforts humble ones. Heaven is not opened by greatness, but by a heart that allows itself to be loved. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Subscribe if you wish to walk this little way with us and discover the simplicity God desires. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux explained that before granting heaven, God does not first look for heroic achievements, flawless virtue, or spiritual brilliance. He looks for something far quieter, far more intimate, and far more accessible to every soul, a heart that trusts him completely. This truth stands at the very center of her little way. Thérèse did not believe heaven was earned through spiritual performance. She believed it was received through childlike trust. She wrote with startling clarity, "It is trust, and nothing but trust, that must lead us to love." For her, heaven was not a reward for the strong, but a gift for the small. Imagine a child standing before a loving parent. The child brings no resume, no list of accomplishments, no proof of worthiness. The child brings only themselves, their need, their trust, their open arms. And the parent does not hesitate to lift them up. This is how Thérèse understood God. She explained that before granting heaven, God looks to see whether the soul has stopped relying on itself and has learned to rest in his mercy. Heaven opens not to self-sufficient souls, but to those who know they cannot save themselves. In the convent, Thérèse lived this truth in hidden ways. She was not admired for great external works. She did not perform extraordinary penances. She did not seek attention. Instead, she focused on the smallest acts. A smile offered when she felt irritated, patience when misunderstood, kindness when unnoticed. Each small act was a silent declaration. "I trust you, God, to do the rest." For Thérèse, heaven begins when the soul stops trying to climb upward and instead allows itself to be lifted. This is why she insisted that spiritual childhood is not optional. It is essential. Only a child can be carried. Only a child dares to be dependent. Only a child trusts love more than effort. She once wrote, "I am too small to climb the rough stairway of perfection." And yet she was unafraid because she knew God would lift her. This teaching gently dismantles our fears. Heaven is not distant because you are weak. It is not delayed because you fall. It is not closed because you struggle. What matters is whether your heart remains open, trusting, and surrendered. Before granting heaven, God does not ask, "How much have you achieved?" He asks, "Will you let me love you?" This is the foundation of everything Saint Thérèse taught. To understand what God wants before granting heaven, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux invites us to look not at heaven first, but at the interior movement of the heart that prepares a soul to receive it. For Thérèse, heaven is not unlocked by effort, but by disposition. God waits not for perfection, but for a heart positioned correctly before him, and that position is humble trust. Thérèse explained that trust is not confidence in oneself, but confidence in God's mercy. This distinction is essential. Many souls desire heaven but remain trapped in a subtle self-focus, measuring progress, fearing failure, comparing themselves to others, or trying to deserve what can only be received. Thérèse saw this as the quiet obstacle that delays intimacy with God. She wrote, "The good God does not need years to accomplish his work of love in a soul. One glance, one act of surrender is enough." This reveals something profound. Heaven is not delayed by weakness, but by resistance to being loved. Imagine a soul standing at the door of heaven holding a heavy ledger, pages filled with good intentions, sacrifices, regrets, and unfinished resolutions. The soul believes this is what must be presented. But Thérèse teaches that God gently asks for something else entirely, the ledger to be put down, because heaven is entered empty-handed. For Thérèse, the soul that God welcomes most readily is not the one that arrives proud of virtue, but the one that arrives poor in spirit. She understood that God delights in filling what is empty. but cannot fill what insists on being full already. This is why she insisted that spiritual childhood is the key. A child does not analyze whether they are worthy to be loved. A child does not negotiate affection. A child does not calculate merit. A child trusts, and God waits for that trust. In the convent, Thérèse practiced this posture daily. When she failed, she did not withdraw in shame. She turned immediately toward God with simplicity. When she succeeded, she did not cling to pride. She offered it back quietly. Everything was filtered through trust, not self-evaluation. This is what prepares the soul for heaven, not moral accounting, not fear-driven obedience, not anxious striving, but a heart that rests. Heaven is not granted to the anxious soul trying to prove itself. It is granted to the peaceful soul that allows itself to be carried. Thérèse once said that if God were to judge her on justice alone, she would have no hope. But because He is love, she had no fear. This was not presumption. It was confidence in who God is. God waits for this confidence. Before heaven opens, God looks for a soul that has stopped bargaining and has begun trusting. A soul that no longer asks, "Have I done enough?" but instead whispers, "I place everything in your hands." This posture transforms everything. It changes how the soul prays, suffers, loves, and hopes. It removes fear, it softens judgment, it quiets the heart, and only a quiet heart can hear heaven calling. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux taught that if heaven is delayed for many souls, it is not because God withholds His mercy, but because something within the heart quietly resists receiving it. This resistance is rarely loud or intentional. It often disguises itself as seriousness, responsibility, or even devotion. Yet Thérèse identified it clearly, the need to feel worthy before trusting God. This is the subtle obstacle. The soul says, "I will trust God once I improve. I will rest once I overcome this weakness. I will believe He delights in me once I am more faithful." But Thérèse insists that this logic is upside down. She wrote, "Perfection does not consist in doing extraordinary things, but in doing ordinary things extraordinarily well, with love." And even more boldly, she taught that waiting to be worthy before trusting God is a form of hidden pride, because it places confidence in future strength rather than present mercy. God does not wait for you to become worthy. He waits for you to become little. Imagine a child who has fallen while learning to walk. The child hesitates to return to the parent, ashamed of the fall, thinking they must first stand up alone. But the parent is already kneeling, arms open, waiting. The delay is not in the parent's love, it is in the child's hesitation. This is what Thérèse saw in many souls. They love God. They desire heaven. They strive sincerely. But they remain tense, burdened, afraid, because they believe trust must be earned. Thérèse rejected this completely. She believed that God is most pleased when a soul trusts Him in its weakness, not after overcoming it. In her own words, "It is just because I am weak that I dare to hope." This sentence captures the heart of her theology. Weakness is not a barrier to heaven, it is the door. Yet the soul resists this truth because it feels too easy, too simple, too undeserved. But heaven is undeserved by definition. God does not grant heaven because the soul has proven itself. He grants heaven because love has accomplished what effort never could. Thérèse understood that God wants the heart before He wants anything else. And the heart is given not through strength but through surrender. The need to feel worthy keeps the soul vigilant, guarded, and self-focused. It turns the spiritual life into constant self-measurement. And as long as the soul is measuring itself, it cannot fully abandon itself. This is why Thérèse insisted that spiritual childhood is not sentimental. It is radical. It demands that the soul stop negotiating with God and begin trusting Him without conditions. Heaven opens when the soul finally says, "I have nothing to offer but my poverty, and I trust that this is enough." God waits for this moment, not because He withholds love until then, but because only then can the soul receive it without fear. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood something that transforms the way we look at heaven. Suffering and imperfection are not obstacles to God's promise. They are often the very instruments He uses to prepare the soul for it. This truth unsettles the logic of effort, but it gently restores the logic of love. Many souls believe that suffering delays heaven, that imperfection disqualifies them, that weakness places them further from God's joy. Thérèse taught the opposite. She believed that God uses what humbles us to open us, and only an open heart can receive heaven. She wrote, "I am content to feel my weakness. It is the reason for my trust." This sentence reveals her spiritual genius. Where others saw failure, she saw an invitation. Where others saw limitation, she saw a door. Suffering for Thérèse was not valuable because it was painful. It was valuable because it emptied the soul of self-reliance. It dismantled illusions of control. It exposed the heart's need, and in that exposure, trust was born. Imagine a soul that never struggles, never falls, never feels helpless. That soul might appear strong, but it would rarely learn to lean. And heaven is not entered by those who stand tall in themselves, but by those who have learned to rest in God. Thérèse did not seek suffering, but she did not fear it. When illness weakened her body, when dryness darkened her prayer, when misunderstanding pierced her heart, she did not ask, "Why is this happening?" She asked, "How can this make me smaller?" Because becoming smaller meant becoming more available to God. Imperfection played the same role. Thérèse was deeply aware of her limitations. She did not deny them. She did not dramatize them. She simply placed them in God's hands. She believed that God looks with special tenderness on the soul that does not hide its flaws, but offers them honestly. This is why she insisted that heaven is not prepared by moral cleanliness alone, but by confidence in mercy. God does not wait for you to stop suffering. He waits for you to stop resisting being carried. God does not wait for you to become flawless. He waits for you to stop pretending you are. Suffering and imperfection soften the heart when they are received with trust. They loosen pride. They quiet ambition. They teach patience. They purify love. And above all, they teach the soul to say, "I need you." That sentence is heaven's language. Thérèse believed that when the soul accepts its weakness without despair, God can finally act freely. Grace flows most abundantly where resistance has been replaced by surrender, and heaven opens most naturally to the soul that has already learned on earth how to be held. This changes everything. Your struggles are not signs that heaven is far. Your imperfections are not proof that God is disappointed. Your suffering is not evidence of abandonment. They may be the very way God is shaping your heart to receive what it could not hold otherwise. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux believed that before granting heaven, God looks not for heroic love, but for a heart trained in small, faithful love. This is one of her most misunderstood teachings. Many imagine heaven is prepared by grand sacrifices or visible acts of virtue. Thérèse revealed something far quieter and far more demanding. Heaven is prepared by love practiced in the ordinary. She wrote, "Love proves itself by deeds, so how am I to show my love? Great deeds are forbidden me. The only way I can prove my love is by scattering flowers." These flowers were her small acts. A smile when she felt irritated, silence when she wanted to defend herself, patience when she felt overlooked, kindness when no one noticed. This kind of love forms the soul for heaven, because heaven is not a place of achievement, it is a state of love. And love must be learned. Thérèse understood that God wants the heart to become capable of eternal communion. This capacity is not built through intensity, but through fidelity. A soul that loves only when it feels strong will struggle in heaven, where love is total and unceasing. But a soul trained to love in weakness, dryness, and obscurity is already living heaven's logic. Small love purifies intention. When love is hidden, it is free from vanity. When love is unnoticed, it is free from reward. When love is ordinary, it is free from performance. This is why Thérèse insisted that heaven opens most naturally to the soul that has learned to love without being seen. Imagine a simple scene in the convent. A sister drops something on the floor. No one reacts. Thérèse notices and quietly picks it up. No one thanks her. No one sees. But heaven sees. And more importantly, her heart is shaped by that moment. She believed these moments slowly stretch the soul, expanding its capacity to love without conditions. And this is precisely what God desires before granting heaven. A heart that can love without needing recognition, reward, or reassurance. This kind of love also heals self-focus. The more the soul practices small love, the less it revolves around itself. Its anxieties soften, its fears quiet, its need to be seen fades. And in that interior freedom, trust grows naturally. Heaven is not given to the soul that loves dramatically, but to the soul that loves faithfully. Thérèse did not fear standing before God because she knew her life was woven with small acts of love, imperfect, fragile, but sincere. She trusted that God would gather these small offerings and transform them into something eternal. Before heaven opens, God looks for this readiness of love. Not the love that dazzles, the love that endures, not the love that demands, the love that gives quietly, not the love that proves itself, the love that simply is. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux spoke about heaven with a peace that surprised many because she spoke about death with the same simplicity she spoke about life. For her, death was not a test to be passed, nor a moment of terror to be endured, but a crossing, the natural completion of a life lived in trust. She believed that the way a soul approaches death reveals what it has truly lived for. A soul trained in effort approaches death with anxiety. A soul trained in fear approaches death with uncertainty. But a soul trained in trust approaches death with confidence, not in itself, but in God. Thérèse once wrote, "I am not dying, I am entering life." This was not poetic exaggeration, it was theological clarity. She understood that heaven does not begin after death, it begins in the posture of the heart long before it. For Thérèse, God wants one thing before granting heaven at death, a heart already accustomed to being carried. Imagine a child who falls asleep in the arms of a parent. The child does not analyze the moment, does not fear the transition from wakefulness to sleep. Trust has already done the work. Sleep comes naturally. This is how Thérèse understood death. A soul that has learned to depend on God daily does not suddenly need to learn trust at the end. The trust is already there. The surrender is familiar. The arms are known. This is why she emphasized the little way so strongly. Small daily acts of trust prepare the soul for the final act of trust. Each moment of surrender becomes rehearsal for eternity. Thérèse did not deny the mystery or seriousness of death. She felt fear, weakness, and uncertainty like any human being, but she refused to let fear interpret God. She believed that God's tenderness does not disappear at the threshold of death. It becomes more visible. She wrote near the end of her life, "I trust Him entirely even in the darkness." This sentence captures everything God desires before granting heaven. Not certainty, not strength, not clarity, but trust, even when clarity is absent. The soul that has lived by trust does not arrive at death with arguments or explanations. It arrives with open hands. And God responds to open hands more readily than to any achievement. This also explains why Thérèse believed purgation is not primarily punishment, but purification of love. She trusted that God finishes what love has begun. The soul that desires Him sincerely will not be rejected. Heaven opens to the soul that does not cling to itself. And so, before granting heaven, God looks at the heart and asks one quiet question: has this soul learned to trust me? If the answer is yes, even weakly, even imperfectly, heaven is already near. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood God's justice in a way that frightened some and liberated many. She did not deny justice. She placed it inside mercy. For her, justice was not opposed to tenderness, it was fulfilled by it. And this understanding reshaped how she believed heaven is granted. She wrote with striking confidence, "For me, justice itself is the proof of His love." This sentence reveals a deep spiritual maturity. Thérèse believed that God's justice is not cold calculation, but faithful love acting truthfully. Many souls fear judgment because they imagine God measuring failures with severity. Thérèse saw something else. She believed that God judges a soul according to its desire to love, not according to its ability to perform. Justice, in her eyes, is God being faithful to who He is, a father who cannot reject a child who trusts Him. This does not mean that God ignores sin or truth. It means that He looks deeper than appearances. He looks at the movement of the heart. Thérèse understood that the soul who fears God's justice usually fears it because it still sees God through the lens of human authority, distant, demanding, easily disappointed. But the soul who has learned spiritual childhood sees justice as reassurance. God will not betray the trust placed in him. Imagine a child who has made mistakes, broken rules, fallen often, yet still runs toward the parent with open arms. The parent does not deny the mistakes, but love interprets them through mercy. This is how Thérèse understood heaven. Before granting heaven, God does not ask whether the soul never failed. He asks whether the soul ever stopped turning toward him. Justice asks, did you choose love over indifference? Mercy asks, did you trust me with your poverty? And when both are answered by a heart that desires God sincerely, heaven opens. Thérèse believed that fear-based religion keeps souls distant, cautious, and tense. It may produce obedience, but it rarely produces love. And heaven is not a place of obedience alone, it is a place of communion. This is why she insisted that confidence in God's mercy is not presumption. Presumption relies on oneself. Confidence relies on God. The soul that says, I trust God because I am good, presumes. The soul that says, I trust God because He is good, loves. Thérèse chose the second path. She trusted that God's mercy would complete what her weakness could not. She trusted that justice would not contradict love. She trusted that heaven would not be closed to a heart that had learned to love simply. And this trust transformed how she lived. She was not anxious about the future. She was not obsessed with judgment. She was not paralyzed by fear. She lived lightly, freely, joyfully, because she believed God's final word is mercy. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux taught that the final interior preparation before heaven opens is the complete surrender of control. Not resignation, not passivity, but a loving release, the moment when the soul stops trying to manage its destiny and allows itself to be guided entirely by God. For Thérèse, control was the last illusion the soul must abandon. Many people trust God in principle, yet still cling to control in practice. They trust Him with salvation, but not with timing, with eternity, but not with daily uncertainty, with heaven, but not with suffering, failure, or the unknown. Thérèse understood that heaven cannot be received by a heart still gripping its own plans. She wrote, I have ceased to rely on myself. I rely on God alone. This was not a spiritual slogan. It was a lived reality. To surrender control means accepting that God's ways are higher than your understanding. It means letting go of the need to foresee outcomes, explain pain, or secure guarantees. It is the choice to love without conditions. Imagine a child being carried across a dark room. The child does not see where they are going. The child does not control the path, but the child does not fear, because the arms carrying them are trusted. This is the posture Thérèse believed God desires before granting heaven. Control creates tension. Surrender creates peace. The soul that still clings to control negotiates constantly with God. If you do this, then I will trust you. If you explain this, then I will accept it. If you remove this suffering, then I will surrender. But heaven is not negotiated, it is entered. Thérèse believed that the soul must become so small that it no longer needs explanations to trust love. She did not ask God to reveal everything. She asked Him to take everything. This surrender reshapes suffering. Instead of resisting it, the soul offers it. Instead of fearing it, the soul allows God to transform it. Instead of demanding answers, the soul rests. And this is why surrender prepares the soul for heaven. Heaven is total communion, total trust, total belonging. A heart still clinging to control would find heaven overwhelming. Letting go is not loss. It is readiness. Thérèse practiced this surrender in the smallest details. When plans changed, she accepted. When strength failed, she trusted. When prayer felt empty, she remained. Each small release trained her heart for the final release, the passage into God's presence. She believed that God wants the soul to arrive at heaven, not clinging to accomplishments, explanations, or certainties, but clinging to Him alone. This is the final posture of spiritual childhood, Open hands, quiet heart, unconditional trust. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux gathered everything she lived, wrote, and taught into one luminous truth. Before granting heaven, God looks for a heart that has learned to trust love more than itself. This is the final attitude, the simplest one, the hardest one, the most freeing one. Not achievement, not certainty, not control, not fearlessness, but trust, quiet, childlike, persevering trust. Thérèse understood that heaven is not a destination reached by effort, but a communion entered by surrender. God does not open heaven to the soul that arrives with explanations, defenses, or spiritual credentials. He opens it to the soul that arrives empty and confident, knowing it is loved. She once wrote, "I will appear before you with empty hands." This was not despair. This was peace. Empty hands mean nothing is hidden, nothing is clutched, nothing is controlled. Only love remains. Throughout her life, Thérèse trained her heart for this moment, not through grand acts, but through small, faithful choices. Each time she trusted instead of panicking. Each time she loved instead of withdrawing. Each time she surrendered instead of insisting. Each time she accepted weakness instead of pretending strength. All of it shaped a heart capable of heaven. God wants this before granting heaven because heaven itself is complete trust. There is no fear there, no self-protection, no effort to justify existence. Heaven is resting forever in love, and only a heart that has practiced resting can enter it fully. This is why Thérèse believed so strongly that spiritual childhood is not a phase. It is the final form of holiness. Only the child enters the kingdom, not because the child is innocent, but because the child depends. Dependence is heaven's language. If you take nothing else from Saint Thérèse, take this. God is not waiting for you to become impressive. He is waiting for you to become available. He is not delayed by your struggles. He is delayed only by your resistance to being loved. The moment the soul stops trying to save itself, heaven begins to open, first within, then beyond. Trust transforms prayer. Trust transforms suffering. Trust transforms death. Trust transforms eternity. And this truth changes how you live today. You no longer rush to prove yourself. You no longer fear being weak. You no longer carry what God wants to carry for you. You live lighter. You love smaller. You trust deeper. Saint Thérèse did not teach a path for the extraordinary. She revealed a path for the tired, the wounded, the ordinary, the imperfect, for anyone willing to trust love more than effort. And this is what God wants before granting heaven, a heart that says, without conditions, without fear, without reserve, I trust you. When that sentence becomes true, heaven is no longer far away. It is already near,